you get started with all of this? At what point do you decide that I'm passionate about mathematics, I like odds, you know, I like spending time in a mathematics exhibit, I like thinking about things like a mental exercise. At what point does that activity become, I'm going to sit down and write a book?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. The answer to your question is about 4 years ago. I was struck by the fact that there was an enormous amount of data available to us. The web was an extraordinary opening up of resources. But there was one great missing reference point. There was no such thing as dictionary of probability. That you could look up in a dictionary what a word means. You could look up in a thesaurus the connotation of a word. If you remember almanacs, you could find out when the sun moon would rise. And then, of course, you have great search engines, which would allow you to look up almost anything. But if you went to Google or Yahoo or even Wolfram Alpha and you do a search on what is the probability of having a shark kill you or a vending machine fall on you or that you might get a particular disease or be arrested or face an audit. Actually, the data exists, but there has been no attempt to pull it all together into one dictionary of probability.
So that's what you were hoping to do with the book, is to sort of create a dictionary, a reference point.
Exactly right.
And that's what the Book of Odds is? And
that's what the Book of Odds is. And the interesting thing is that we began the work with only a few people, two students working with me. We created a few hundred examples of what we call odds statements, and you've seen some of them flashed on the screen. And once we realized how interesting it was, we then realized that the scale of the job was enormous, and that it was very much like creating the first dictionary or creating the first encyclopedia. In fact, one of my advisors said, "I get what you're doing. You're creating a 19th century killer app." And indeed, that's what we've had to do. So we worked for 3 years, 50 man-years, and we created 400,000 odd statements. Now, for those of you who imagine, let's say imagine you had created the very first Oxford English Dictionary or the very first Encyclopedia Britannica, but it was 2010. Would you think you would ever print it? Or would you go straight to the web? The truth is that people buy books nowadays for entertainment, and they go to the web for research. And so even though we intended to publish a whole series of books, we realized that the web was a far more efficient mechanism for, in fact, researching this. And so what you'll see next is, in fact, our website, bookofodds.com, which contains over 400,000 odd statements and allows you to search them. And you can search them by keyword, or you can search them by number. So if perhaps a doctor has told you that you're facing the odds of a particular illness, and those odds are 1 in 50, you can look up 50 and see other probabilities of that same range, and therefore try and find a way of understanding or comparing. The other thing you can do is, if you go to the visual browse, is because we have this enormous, wonderful network, you can go exploring. So, for example, you can click on that dot, and you will get an odd statement that relates these elements to the core element. But then if you click on, for example, Indiana will now become the central node, and then you can keep wandering through what I call the landscape of probability. And you can go through these 400,000 odd statements and just see what putting one next to each other might produce for you.
So using this, you have basically an almost sort of unlimited pool of information at your fingertips, which brings up kind of an interesting point in itself, because there are a lot of people that say that your average person, even a trained mathematician, doesn't have a really good grasp of what odds and specifically what big numbers are. There's a lot of people that say, numbers over 1 million are meaningless to the human mind. And so how do people really look at odds, and what do odds really mean?
Well, you're quite right. And in fact, part of our mission was to prove them wrong. One of the things that we thought about was how many times in the past people have been supposedly incapable of doing something, which all of us now take for granted. So let me give you an example. Let's take temperature. How many of you checked the temperature before you got dressed this morning? So what did you learn? 38. And so you learned that it was 38 degrees Fahrenheit. And then what did that tell you?
Freezing.
And it helped you dress appropriately, right? Well, how did you know that the abstraction 38 little circle capital F means that it's cold and you need to dress warmly? You've calibrated that number through your own personal experience. So that human beings, I believe, are brilliant at calibration if they're given the information that will allow them to compare an abstraction like 38 degrees Fahrenheit or 12 degrees centigrade to their own personal experience. Let's try another experiment in calibration. I have here some sodas. This is Refresco Goya coconut soda. Has anyone here ever bought one of these? Okay, I can testify that nobody in the crowd has ever spent money on Goya coconut soda. So the question I want to ask you is, if I have three bottles and their prices are 90 cents, 9 cents, and $9, so they're powers of 10, which one is the true price? How many of you think $9 is the true price? Nobody raises their, we got one. How many? What was it?
She said she thought it's important.
Oh, it's imported. No, that's an interesting point. They import water too. How about coconut? How about 9 cents? Who thinks that's a real price?
People from Mexico.
That came from Mexico, maybe the cost of it. And then how many people think 90 cents? Okay, so here's an object that none of you have ever bought before, and yet you with remarkable accuracy, 98% accuracy, are able to guess within one order of magnitude the correct price. So why are you able to do that? Because you have a huge network of calibrations of other prices, maybe other soft drinks, other foods. You have some idea of how the value and costs of things have changed over time. I like to ask people if they remember what a pizza cost. This gentleman is probably about my age. What did a pizza slice cost when you were a kid?
I don't know, 25 cents?
25 cents, right? When I was a kid, it was 15 cents for a slice, dime for a Coke. What does it cost today?
At least $1.50 for the Coke. About the same, right?
About $50, $2.50, $5 for the pair. And yet, so not only are we able to calibrate, but we're able to calibrate over time because he can remember the calibration of the soft drink back in 1965, and you know it in 2010. Maybe that was 1985. Okay, let's look at another one. Does anyone know what these are? Any Shakespeare scholars? Well, these are the signatures of William Shakespeare, the great playwright. And the thing about them is that he spelled his name differently every time he spelled it. In the 17th century, nobody spelled the same words the same way. It was not considered a normal skill. And after all, the first dictionary of Dr. Johnson's was not going to be published for another 100 years. So the routine spelling of words did not exist in the 17th century. Here's another example. Oh, these are wonderful. These are actual distributions of all the spellings of Shakespeare. So as you can see, it's extraordinary how many different ones there are.